All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream session of Advanced Passage Planning for BC Waters. For those of you that I haven't had the chance to meet previously, my name is Lyle Wetsch. I am with CanBoat Nanaimo as well. Whoop, seeing somebody. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to. All right, just give me 1 second here. Is everybody hearing me okay? Nope. All right, just give me 1 second. All right, can somebody let me know if you can hear me? All right, so I'm getting a thumbs up, so I think we've got people that can hear me now. All right, so that's good. Maybe for those of you that are not hearing me, you might want to check that, make sure that it's not muted on your end. So anyway, awesome to have so many people register and come in. As I was mentioning, my name is Lyle Wetsch. I'm a member of the bridge here at CanBoat Nanaimo, as well as the owner and instructor from Latitude Sailing. And what we want to do over the next 4 evenings, over the next month, going through on Monday evenings, is to really take a look at a couple of key things with regards to our passage planning and navigating within BC waters, and some of the key things that we need to be cognizant of and aware of. Now, we did ask that if you want to just type in the chat to let us know where you're connecting in from, and if you've got any questions as we're working our way along through the session, if you could just type them into the chat, but putting a Q in front of the questions just helps me moderate them to be able to see that they're questions and that we can actually get to them while we're working our way through the presentation and through the session. And so there's a lot of key things that we are going to be sort of covering over the next 4 Monday evenings as we go. I've got a few people that are connecting into the chat. I'm hoping that they're, just give me 1 second. I'm just going to respond to a couple things. There's some people in the chat that are responding and handling it and giving people key directions. So that's great. Thanks very much. All right. So what we want to do is to take a look at some of the key things about the session that we're going to be working our way through and where we're going to be going and what we want to be talking about this evening as we go. So one of the things that we really need to think about is just to give you a quick brief background of myself. As I mentioned, that I am with CanBoat Nanaimo, as well as the owner instructor of Latitude Sailing. And I've got about 35 years experience rather, sailing on both coasts of North America as well as in the Caribbean, and 35 years as a professional educator, both in the diving industry, where I spent a number of years training recreational and technical scuba diving instructors throughout the Caribbean and Central and South America, as well as New Zealand and the South Pacific, as well as at the university. I do have several qualifications in addition to the CanBoat certifications and qualifications. I'm also a powerboat and sail instructor assessor for Nautic Ed and an instructor evaluator for sail and power with ISPA as well. So I've been around on the water a fair bit, and I guess my diving background has really got me, focused on the planning stages and making sure everything's in place and everything is key. Now, we are going to be going through 4 nights of this session. This night, the first one, is really going to be focused on the preliminary planning that's in now. The second week is going to be taking a look at moving into some of the electronic tools and looking at Garmin boating and Orca. The Garmin boating is the new name of Navionics, and Orca as the 2 types of planning tools and apps that will come into play as we look at expanding some of the things that we're talking about this evening into that component. We're also going to be then on week number 3 taking a look at Aquamap and a variety of other mobile app planning tools that we use when we're dealing in different environments and to get key details. And each week we're going to be working on bringing all of these key things together and building and integrating into what is essentially the plan that we follow virtually every time we leave the dock with the boat, whether it's with students or whether it's just with family or on a pleasure trip as we go. We're then going to move in week 4 and take a look at how, when we're in our pre-planning stages or underway, how we integrate all of this electronic planning with our paper charts to make sure that we have a backup in case something catastrophic goes wrong and we lose our trunk line and we lose all of our electronics. We always want to make sure we can immediately switch and be continuing our pathway, because Murphy's Law, or actually O'Reilly's Law, who said that Murphy was an optimist, is that you're going to lose the electronics just as you're about to go into a really critical destination, tight passageways, tight currents, challenging entry, or whatever you've got. So over the course of these 4 sessions, we're really going to cover a significant amount of information and be providing you with a lot of additional online tutorials and a lot of other key things that can come into play as you put stuff together. Now, some of you have been mentioning in the chat about the online website materials. This was sent in the initial welcome email where we provided you with the link. We've got it there on the screen. It's canboat-nanaimo.ca/passage-planning-live, and the password to get into that page, which is restricted to just those of you that have registered for this session, is CanBoat with a capital C and a capital B -latitude with a capital L. And that will give you access to get in to all of the links for all 4 of the sessions. It's where we're going to be posting all of the key updates, handouts, additional video tutorials, YouTube playlists that will go through a lot more detail than we're going to be able to cover in any one evening in a 2-hour session, to really help make sure that you've got all of the key resources that you're looking for or that you're wanting to gain access to. So as an example, if we take a look at the website for tonight's session, and we'll just zoom in here a little bit so that you've got a little bit of a better view. We see the link to the YouTube live session. There's a link to be able to download the PDFs of the session handouts, and those will be available typically on the day, so I can make sure I've got everything updated at the session. And then we've got additional resources. In this case, there's several things that we're going to be talking about as we work our way along today. One is the 2026 Canadian boating documents that we're going to talk about that you need to make sure you've got on board your boat. So we've compiled a single sheet with some nice, quick, easy links to help get you there. There's the Aquamap GEC account creation. As we mentioned to you in the welcome email, you're going to gain access to the North American charts as well as a master account for a couple of months as part of this session at no charge. The only thing is that in order for me to go through the paperwork and to request that through Aquamaps, what we need to make sure that we've got is you need to create an account, send me that email that you used for that Aquamap account, and preferably with your first and last name so that I can align you with who you are so I can match that up. And then I fill in a document and I send that through to Aquamaps, and that allows us to be able to then they will then add those resources onto your login. So for those of you that had sent me emails today, I did try to respond and get most of them sent in to Aquamaps, but it is not until our third night that we're going to be looking at Aquamaps. So we've still got time to be able to do that. And there were a lot of you that sent me your logins earlier today that I didn't get a chance to get around to before our session this evening. There's also links there to a couple of planning sheets that we have. There's the multi-day advanced planning sheet, both in Excel and in Numbers. And some of you who may have tried to download the Numbers one, that link was not working, but it was corrected earlier today, as well as a single day planning sheet. And there's a couple of other sheets that are going to be in there. So we're also going to be providing some YouTube tutorials on some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight to just sort of save us time as we're working through the evening, as well as at the end of each session. What we'll do is probably the next day, later on in the day, we will be posting a practice exercise. That's entirely up to you whether you want to do it or not, but it's a good opportunity to be able to integrate some of the information, and we'll be putting everything up there that you need as far as the different documents that you may not have been able to download from the various government websites as we're taking a look at that as we go. So there's a lot of resources there, and that will continue as you work your way through all of the different weeks. The session handouts will be added on as we progress through that time. So that's where we're going to be going. And it was the boating documents links is coming up with just the CanBoat main page. I will correct that at the end of the session. Steve, thanks for mentioning that, and we will make sure that that link's working. I thought I had it linked to the right document, but must have missed that in the save feature, so I will deal with that. If there are any issues with any of the links, I am obviously as the communications officer, the webmaster, so I'm the one that deals with it. There are so many different things in prepping for this with, we've got close to 400 people registered. So making sure that everybody had the right information and the details and stuff like that was a little time consuming. So I may have rushed a little bit on those links, but I will make sure that all those links are correct at the end of the evening as we work our way through. So tonight's session is really about some of the preliminary planning stages that you do, the things that you want to take care of before you're going to go on a trip. Or in my case, I sort of like to figure out what I'm going to be doing in the summer, and I spend all those dreary winter days, of which we didn't get a whole lot of here in Nanaimo this year, but I spend those sort of going, okay, I'm going to go to Princess Louisa in June, so I start doing my preliminary plans, or I'm going to head up to the, Desolation Sound, or whatever I'm planning to do. I do a lot of that preliminary advanced planning in the winter. But there's also some things that you're going to want to do to sort of keep yourself current and keep your materials current as you're working your way along. Now, it's been attributed to a lot of people going back Benjamin Franklin, but I've only been able to find it properly attributed to Winston Churchill that says that he who fails to plan is planning to fail. And that's one of the things where, yes, you can go out and just do a quick little day sail in your local area that you know very, very well. But if you want to be doing any larger journeys or other things that are happening, you've got to be planning for it. Because if you don't, that's where you're going to have boats going backwards in Dodd Narrows because they didn't bother looking at the tides and the currents that are going to be running. Or you've got people that are, I think one of the funniest Whiskey Gulf dialogues I ever heard was where the range officer was yelling at a large power boat at one point, and they eventually got their attention and they said, if you look above you, do you see the military gunship helicopter? Please follow it out of our live firing zone. It's like, how loud do you have to have the stereo turned up that you're missing a helicopter hovering over and above you, where if people don't plan their routes and they don't think about where they're going and they don't understand about Whiskey Gulf, then that can lead to a lot of critical issues and critical challenges. So where we want to go tonight, and we may not get through all of the bits and pieces that we've got on the slides this evening. That's one of the benefits of having a 4-night seminar, is whatever we don't get to, we can start off with that next week as we go. But we want to start off in thinking about the documents that you need to have on board your vessel, what downloaded documents you need to have, and what paper charts you need to have, and how you need to go about making sure that they are updated. Because even if you go down to the Chandler tonight and buy a set of charts and put them on board the boat, they are not current because there's been changes and updates since those charts have been printed. And in order for those charts to be legally compliant, they have to be current and up to date. And that means that you've got work to do before they're going to be functional for you. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, and we will have a definite tutorial that will be published on that side of things. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the preliminary planning steps and stages that you would take if you're planning both a multi-day trip or if you're planning a single-day journey, depending upon what you're doing. And some of the things that you want to be considering about safety, communications, fuel, weather, provisioning, pump outs, water, etc. All of these things that may come into play depending upon how far you're going, how remote you're going, and how long your trip is going to be and what your plans are going to be happening. And then we're going to start taking a look at some of the information that we're going to be putting onto our planning sheet. We'll be expanding on that a lot more next week once we start getting into Garmin boating and Orca and taking a look at how the electronic tools can really help us with these advanced planning stages as we go. So let's start off by talking about the current documents that you must have on board your vessel. This is a legal requirement as well as a serious common sense requirement that you need to have. Well, the first thing and your most basic documents that you need is you've got to have your PCOC if your boat has a motor. You must have the Pleasure Craft Operator's Card, and that is your physical card, not a copy of your card, not a picture of it, but the actual physical card needs to be with you on board the vessel. Likewise, your ROCM card. If your vessel is equipped with a radio, you need to have your ROCM, your Restricted Operator Certificate Maritime card and certification with you on board the vessel. And that's going to be really important when you think about your proper planning and utilization. And next week, we're going to be taking a look at how your radio checks come as part of your pre-departure planning, both for your DCIM, your not DCIM, this is Defense and Civil Institute of Medicine. Apologies for that. But when you're thinking about your radio calls and making sure that you've got everything set and taken care of. Neil, I saw your note there. Yeah, there seems to be an issue on the Canadian boating document. I will address that this evening or tomorrow after this session. We'll go there. So a couple of you have already mentioned questions in the chat with regards to charts. And in Canada, the vessels must carry the most recent and largest scale charts and publications for the area they are navigating. These charts and publications must be issued by or authorized by the Canadian Hydrographic Services. So at the present time, that means, yes, we do need to have charts, paper charts that are current and up to date, issued by the Canadian Hydrographic Services. The electronic charts, the ENCs that are an exception, those are commercial vessel electronic charts, not what we're going to have on a recreational vessel. But there's also a lot of other documents that are required that you need to have. So when I get the link fixed, we have prepared a current list of all the boating and navigation documents that you need to have on board, just to sort of streamline the process as to where they go. Yes, there's a question about how can I buy BC charts? There are paper copies available everywhere because they are required in Canada, in Canadian waters. You have to have the paper charts available. So depending upon where you are, any chandler that's near you will have those available. If they don't have BC charts, if you're from outside the province, you can order them online from a number of locations. Or when you get to BC, you can have them when you get to the location. Now, this legislation comes from the National Safety Regulations in 2020, which is the current legislation that we're governed by, that mandates that vessels carry the most current charts and publications from the Canadian Hydrographic Services. All right. So that means that whenever they're updated on the website, you need to make sure that you've got those electronic documents updated, or when there's changes or updates to the paper charts, you need to make sure that you've made those updates. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. So the electronic documents that you must legally have on board your boat, you have to have a copy of Chart 1, which is no longer available in printed format, but it is available to download for free from the links in the site from the Canadian Hydrographic Services. You must have the largest scale charts for their route. So that's your entire destination, the trip that you're going. So what that's going to mean is, depending upon your trip, you're probably going to need to have 3 levels of charts. You're going to need to have the coastal charts, the approach charts, and the harbor charts. And we'll take a look at how you tell what charts you actually need to have for a journey as part of our session this evening. You need to have the notice to mariners, and the requirement is that you have downloaded the last area that you've got. You also need to have the current tide tables and the current issues of the sailing directions. Now, the question or the comment that's come up that says that under a certain vessel length and in waters you're well versed in, you don't need paper charts. If you know everything about the water that your boat is operating in that is on the charts, then you don't need to have that. But the problem is, if anything were to go wrong, you had a situation where the bottom of your vessel was deeper than the bottom of the ocean in a particular area, that is going to be an indication that you don't know everything that's on those paper charts. And therefore, that would be a situation where potentially your insurance company would void your insurance because you did not have the legally required equipment on board your vessel. Not only that, but what happens if you lose your electronics? Then how are you going to be able to know that you've got the correct information? The reason why electronic tools such as Navionics or Aquamap or any of those other tools do not meet legal requirements to be on board is because of the fact that they are not necessarily updated in real time as the information is from the Canadian Hydrographic Services, and they may not put all of the information from the Canadian Hydrographic Services on the electronic charts. And that's why we need to be operating with that redundant system and make sure that we have current paper charts on board. Because if there was ever any issue and you don't have current paper charts on board, you can bet that that would be used by an insurance company to prove that your boat was not legally compliant. And as we all know, that's going to do things to void your insurance. And so, yes, if you've got intimate knowledge, and, for example, you're the ferry that goes across to Newcastle Island from Nanaimo, and you're a ferry captain, you go zipping back and forth there 20 times a day. Well, yes, you don't need to have your paper charts for that in that situation, but you do need to make sure that you've got it. And we will talk about how to make sure that you've got those things squared away. Now, the main portal for the Canadian Hydrographic Services has links to the current tide and current tables for all of Canada, the sailing directions for all of Canada, Chart 1, the Atlas of Tidal Currents, and your paper chart catalogs. Now, the paper chart catalog is a PDF document that is not really great and easy to use. And so we're going to talk about that and how that one comes together and how it plays out. The Coast Guard actually has several publications that you need to have on board. The Canadian Aids to Navigation System, lists of lights, buoys, and fog signals, and the Notice to Mariners. That's the annual as well as the monthly editions. Now, one of the caveats that comes into play is if you've got really old charts, then you're going to need to have the key details as far as where you're going and what you're doing and any changes that have been done if you have not made changes to the charts. So from a legal standpoint, and I'm not a lawyer, I did not sleep at the Holiday Inn Select last night, but you're required to have the current information on board the vessel. And when you're doing that, if you haven't updated your charts, if you at least as a minimum had every notice to mariners from the date that chart was last updated to the current date, technically you have all of the information, just not in a very usable format. And so that's going to be a bit of a challenge from there. But at least if you've got that, then that means that you've got the updates, but you might have 30 pages of updates to try to sort of figure out if you're switching onto a chart to figure out, where's this flashing buoy? What is going on? What's the depth of this wreck? What has changed from this? And we're going to show you a real easy way to make sure that you're updating all your charts and being notified when there is an update. And that's one of the things that they've done a really good job with. So our tide and current tables and sailing directions are going to be key. And those get updated not necessarily at the exact time. So as an example, when you take a look at the sailing directions, PAC 201 was 2025-10, but then it was updated again in 2026, 02. And so you've got to periodically go in and just check and make sure that there haven't been any major updates. But here on the Pacific Coast, we actually have 4 documents for the sailing directions. And these are really, really critical when you're going into any new area, because these are going to have all of the information about entering into a particular harbor or going into a particular area, or where can you anchor, what's the risk of anchoring in one side or another, that they can't fit onto a paper chart. So all of this information is going to be really important as part of your planning stages, which we'll take a look more at next week as far as how we bring all these pieces together with our electronic planning. Now, when we're thinking about the paper charts, we've got chart number 1, which tells us all of the key things that the things on the chart mean and what they do. And they play a key role in helping you be able to update your charts. And then you've got the paper chart catalog, which is a PDF document. And again, not very useful, because we're going to show you why the electronic one just makes your life so much easier as you're going along. And that's where One of the first things you need to do when you're thinking about doing a trip is figuring out, well, where am I generally going to go? And what are the charts I need to have for the trip? And remember, the legal requirement is that you've got the largest scale charts available. So that means that if there is a harbor chart, you have to have the harbor chart. In areas where the harbor chart doesn't cover it and there's an approach chart, you need to have the approach chart. And on areas where the approach charts don't cover, then you need to have the coastal chart. So you're generally going to need to make sure that you've got all three types of these charts for the passage that you're going to be doing. Now, one of the key things that you want to do is you can check two things. You can check the edition date, which is going to tell you when was the last time that chart was a full new reprint. So in this case, this one here, when I was looking at it, was 2005 in June 30th. And then it says that the last notice was applied 2025-10-17. So that's where there was the last update that needed to be done. And it's really important that sometimes you're going to be able to update your charts, and sometimes there's going to be so many updates that if you've got an old set of charts, you may be better off to just replace some of the key ones and update those to make sure that they're current. And as a little aside, that's one of the reasons why I've got a filing system, a little portable filing cabinet, where I have all of my paper charts folded and in file folders, and we'll talk more about that next week or in the tutorial. And I have them at home because that way there, when I get an email that says there's been an update to a particular chart, I can do the update while I'm here. And then when I'm planning a trip, when I'm getting ready to go, I simply, in my planning sheet, which we'll be walking you through, I make note of what coastal approach and harbor charts I need. I pull them out of my file system at home, put them in a little travel file case, and that's what I take with me on board the boat. So I know I've got all of the key charts and updates. Gary asked that, does chart 1 have updates? Not generally. And if they ever did, then the electronic one would be able to have that if there was any new signs. But generally, chart 1 is pretty constant. So if you've got a printed one, it's probably still functional and working. The one thing that the electronic version of chart 1 is very helpful for is because it's a searchable PDF file, you can search for certain things to get you to the right name. So it can sometimes help you locate an image that you're looking for rather than just randomly flipping through the pages of chart number 1. So this is where, once you've figured out what charts you need on your travel plan, such as the spreadsheets that I've uploaded that I use, or simply on the notes that you're making when you're preparing for your trip, you want to designate the charts that you need for each day of your journey. And so that's where each one of these lines on the chart that you see here on the slide is a separate day. What that allows me to do is at the beginning of the day, before I leave on my trip for that day, if I was in my first day of the journey, I know I would need 3463, 3443, 3447, 3458, and 3475. I can take those out of my filing system and put them into a waterproof case. I have the Blue Performance CMAT bag, but there's tons of different waterproof chart bags available. And then I have that in the cockpit. I'm on a sailboat, so not everything's dry. That's why I've got the waterproof chart cases, and I have it there so that if anything happens to my electronics, I've got my paper charts that I need right there with me. And it's also a lot easier if I've got passengers that want to sort of see where we are. I can just show them the paper chart. They can go, oh, okay, and they can start to see where things are if I've got passengers on board. And so this is where the stuff that you do in your pre-planning translates into what you do when you're prepping your boat for departure and what you do each day when you're on the water and underwater. So what I want to do now is to take a look at two things. I want to take a look and give you a brief little overview on how you go about figuring out what charts you need for a particular journey and how you go about updating your charts and what are the key things that come into play. So let's take a look, first of all, at how do you figure out what chart you need for a particular journey. So if we go here and we take a look at our nautical charts page. So here, as you scroll down under services and information, there's purchase charts for navigation. So if you click on that specific link, it'll show you the chart index and the chart catalog and all the list of charts. This is the one that's going to be important, the one that says chart index, because that's an interactive site that is going to be key in us doing the planning. So what we do is we go to the chart index, and as we see, it's got a ton of information. What I want to do is I want to turn off all of the links except for paper charts, and I'm going to turn off everything except coastal for my first run. And so this way here, I can then move to the area, zoom in to where we are, and say, okay, if I'm planning on making a run down to the Gulf Islands for the week, I can take a look and say, okay, well, on this chart, where's Nanaimo going to be? Where's Dod Narrows? Okay, well, there's Gabriola, there's Newcastle, so this is Nanaimo here. So I'm going to be starting out here. So as I click on that box, it tells me that this is going to be chart number 3463, and it gives me the last notice was put on 2026, February 13th. So the only chart that's going to be legally compliant in this case, needs to make sure it was updated to February of this month. All right, so that tells me I've got that one. Depending upon how far south I'm going to go into the Gulf Islands, I might need 3462. And if I'm going to go down through Samson Narrows, this is going to cover me, so I don't need to go on the other and to sort of take a look through that. And so as we go back and say, okay, so I'm going to need those as my coastal charts. If I click on the approach charts, this is going to show me the next set that I'm going to need. And so for the approach, depending upon which path I'm going to take, I might need to have 3456, but I'm definitely going to need to have 3443. And then I'm definitely going to need to have 3442. And if I'm going down through Samson Narrows into Brentwood Bay, then I'm going to need to have 3441. And that tells me what approach charts I'm going to need. But remember, the legal requirement is the largest scale charts. And so that's where we need to take a look at what are the harbor charts. Now, don't freak out when we see so many different squares, because a lot of these are going to be on approach charts in a little side chart that's in the box on there, but you need to know where it's coming from. So in this case here, we take a look, we've got 3458, and then I click on the smaller box, that's 3447. And then I click on the next box, and that one's also 3447. So there's 3 charts there, and 3447 is going to cover 2 of them. Then when we're getting into going through Dod Narrows, we've got 3475 that I need, and this one is also 3475. And depending upon what I'm planning to do, if I'm going to go into Ladysmith, then I need to make sure I've got 3475. Okay, well, we've already got that one covered off. If we're going to go to Thetis and go to Telegraph Harbor, then that's 3477. We need to have, if we're going to go down and go through Samson Narrows and Maple Bay maybe, then 3478 is for Samson Narrows, and 3478 is Bird's Eye Cove, and Genoa Bay is going to be 3478 as well. So this is where, depending upon where you may need to be going, you're going to want to make sure that you've got all of those key charts available for you. So that's the pathway that you take to determine what are the charts that you need to have on board. And so this is where all of that information would be translated into the sort of that Excel sheet or that number sheet that I have in the planning that says my coastal 3463, 3443, and then the harbor charts that I need depending upon what you're planning on doing on that particular trip. So that is probably one of the most important useful tools that is the first place you're going to go to figure out what are the charts you need to have. And then you've got to make sure that A, you have those charts, and B, that they're up to date. And that's where going through the updating process is one of the things. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly here. I will put a tutorial to sort of cover this in a little bit more detail for you before next week's session. The first thing you've got to do is to take a look at the chart date on your chart. And so there's a couple of key dates that are going to be important. You want to take a look and see what the edition is. And this is where, in this case, the one that's on the screen says the new edition is July 1st of 2005. And that's going to be important because if you take a look and your chart is the one that says the edition date, for example, when we take a look at this 3463 one, it says the edition date was 2005-06-30. If your edition is significantly before that, then that's telling you that there's going to be a massive amount of changes. So you need to make sure that you at least are on the current edition. And then the second thing you've got to take a look at is the date when it was last corrected to the notice to mariners. And so this is where, when you go to the channelers and you're looking at a chart, you want to look at that notice to mariners and see when was the last update. Because particularly if it's a chart that isn't very popular, it may have been hanging around in that channelers for a while. And sometimes they may even have 4 or 5 versions of a particular chart that have different corrected dates. And to save yourself the extra work, you want to pick the most current and recent one. And so just as an example, there were a couple of my charts that were getting a little worn out because we work with them when we're teaching and when we're doing planning and stuff. And so I went and updated a couple of them last week. The majority of them, when I bought them from the chandler, might have had 1 page of updates to do. However, there was one that was updated to November of 2025 that had 8 pages of updates that needed to be made because there were a lot of significant updates that had taken place. And so you want to make sure that you go through and do all of that. And then once you've done the updates on a chart, you make a change on that corrected to the notice to mariners. In fact, the updates have a little date on them, and technically you're supposed to like cut that little date out and glue it onto your chart so that you know when that chart has been currently updated. The other thing that's going to be key is sometimes those updates are going to be, there's going to be so many updates that they actually send you a whole piece that you print out and put onto your chart to overlay a particular area. And that way there, it just saves you the hassle of making so many different changes. One of the charts that I purchased had no written updates, but it had 2 patches that needed to be done to the chart. And those are easy because you just print them out onto full page labels through a color printer, and then you stick them in and away you go. So, how do you tell what are the changes since the chart was updated? Well, let's just walk through. We'll go through and show you this rather than going through the particular slides. The slides will be there to give you some additional guidance afterwards. We will get to questions in a minute, but just if you can remember to put a Q in front of the questions, it'll help me find the questions out of the information that's there. So when you're taking a look, and we go back to not finding our nautical charts, but as we scroll down in the bottom of that page, which is on the chart, the charts.gc.ca, we see update your nautical charts. And so when you click on that, this is the part where it gets really good because you can see what the patches are. The best thing at this point is you click on the search the chart corrections. And then what you need to do is to simply put the chart number in. So if we went back to one of the previous ones I had, if I hadn't done the updates and I took a look at if we did 3463 as the chart number, and it was updated, last updated was 2020 and 07 and 31. So if I haven't updated this chart since 2020, it's a pre-pandemic chart, and you'll see that it'll put today's date on the end date there. If I simply click search, what this is going to do is provide me with a download that I can download as a PDF that has all of the key details. And I'm just going to do that, save it to my desktop. And so if I had not done those updates, just to give you an idea, there's 5 pages of updates that need to be done to that particular chart since the 2020 was the date that it was. And so all of these are going to be laid out in sequence. The most current ones are going to be up top, and the earliest ones are going to be down there. And so this is where there may be things like you need to add a rock, which covers and uncovers at drying height. Those are probably going to be pretty important that you want to make sure that you've got. There's a lot of times when navigation beacons or lights are going to be, changing their flashing sequence. So if you're navigating at twilight or at night and you're looking for a particular flashing sequence on a light and that doesn't exist anymore, that can be a significant challenge. And with all of these, a lot of the times you'll see changes in submarine cables where you've got to remove one and put a new one on there, adding radar reflectors or deleting things or private buoys that aren't there. As you go through, this gives you the ability to find all of these key chart corrections. And so one of the things that is a great place to sort of start is to have a list of all of the charts that you currently own for the areas in which you're boating, and then figure out when was the last time they were updated, and get the PDFs of all of the updates that you need to do. Now, once you've got that, you don't have to do that all the time, because this is where there is an amazing service that if you haven't done it yet, then that's going to be a key one. And this is subscribing to the Notice to Mariners email certification service. This is a free service where what you do is you put your email in, you create an account first, you put your email and password in, and then you tell them what are the charts that you own and how frequently do you want to get notified. And so I'll log into my account so you can see. And as you go in and do that, once a week, you get an email that says, of all the charts that you've told us to be on the lookout for, none of them have any updates, and all of these are okay. Or this chart has updates, or these 2 charts have updates. And that's going to be one of the key things. So if I just log into my account here, you'll see that it shows all of the different charts that there are. And if I edit this, I can go in and I can say, these are the list of my current charts. And I can go and say, what are the ones I want to add up? And so I can sort of search, I can find the particular charts, and I simply add them to the list of my current charts. And then I say, how often do I want to receive the chart updates? I would never recommend never, because why are you signing up for that? You could choose weekly, you could choose monthly. I choose weekly just to make sure that it doesn't get too bogged down, and it's a lot easier for me to take 10 minutes, once a week to do any updates that need to be done, as opposed to trying to find time, because if it's too big of a job, it ends up accumulating, and then you've got, a good weekend or whatever spent updating your charts that you go. And then you can receive a notification when new publications are ready. So what this does is when there's a new tools or new documents that come out, they'll send you an email that says there is a new Notice to Mariners available. Click here to download for the monthly ones of those. And there's no charge for doing that. And by creating that, what happens is you're going to get an email notification that is going to have all of the key details. So I'm just going to flip over here, get back to the presentation. So we went through how to use the tool, and this is an example where over on the right-hand side, you see a patch. And so in this case, what they would do is there would be a separate PDF to download, which was a patch. And when you download that patch, it gives you very clear directions to print it out on a color printer. Make sure it's 1-to-1, don't scale to fit or anything like that. And rather than printing it out on paper and then using crazy glue or something to put it onto the charts, I will typically just print these out onto a full page label that you can buy at Staples or any of the stationery supply stores. And then it's simply a matter of using scissors or an X-Acto knife, cutting it out, peeling the label back, lining it up with the latitude and longitude, and sticking it onto the chart. This is also one of the easiest ways, if you know there's been patches to a chart, to tell whether the chart's been up to date. If it's missing key patches on, that's a key indication. And so this is one of the things that you always want to make sure is that the charts you have either on board your vessel or on board a charter vessel that you may be taking out has the proper charts, and those charts are current and up to date. And that's one of the things that's really important, and because you legally need to have those current paper charts on board. So this is one of the things that it becomes a little bit challenging sometimes for charter operators to keep up to date on all of their different paper charts, particularly if they're just left on board the boat. So it's really important to make sure that there's a mechanism for making sure those charts are updated and all of the different updates are taking place as they go. So monthly, there will be the Notice to Mariners edition that'll come out, but it's going to have all of the updates. It's not going to be designated just for your particular chart. And that's where signing up for that subscription service makes life so much easier, because when you sign up for those email notifications, you see an example of, this was an email that I got that said between January 3rd and January 9th of 2026, there were two of my charts that were updated, 3443 and 3475. And then there's a whole list of all of my other charts that did not have any updates that period. It's really, until you sign up for this service, you really have no idea how frequently these things are really being updated and how important some of those updates are. And this is one of the things that is, personally, I feel one of the key things that a lot of boaters don't do, or don't have the paper charts, or if they have them, they're rolled up in a tube and are sitting somewhere on board the boat and haven't seen the light of day. And that can create a challenge if they're ever needed, because they may be missing critical information or have the incorrect information that's available. Now, for updating the charts, there's a couple of tools that are available, and we'll talk more about these a little bit later. And one of them is Weems and Plath actually has a chart correction template, which has little boxes that you can dial in. So instead of working on your artistic skills and ability to draw in a buoy or draw in a data chart or draw in something, it's got all sorts of little grids that make your life super easy to be able to do that. Now, in order to do updates, the recommendation from Notice to Mariners and for Admiralty charts and for Canadian navigation charts is to make those updates in a magenta or a violet indication. And this is where several little chandlers will sell. Pentel makes a 0.25 millimeter gel pen in violet. This is Slicko, which is also a 0.25 millimeter gel pen that is available for about half the price of what the ones that I've seen at the Chandlers are. And you can pick them up if you've got a Staples near you. They're like $3 for a 0.25 millimeter pen. So all of the updates you do onto your papal charts is going to be key as you're taking a look at that for there. So that's one of the key things as we take a look at the tools. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of the questions that we've got that have come in. Let's take a look at what we've got. I don't have the Q&A set up there. So there was a couple of ones about the URL for the Notice to Mariners and email notifications. They're either going to be on the handouts or they're going to be on the list of charts. But let me just go back to it as well. So if I go to there we go. So as far as the location, let me just move the questions out of the way. So if you go for the Notice to Mariners, that's going to be on the Canadian Coast Guard chart. So if you just Google Notice to Mariners, so it's notmar.gc.ca, that's where you've got the ability to search all of the charts corrections. But they also have that available for linkage. We just go back here. If you go to charts.gc.ca, or you just Google update your papal chart, your nautical charts Canada, it's going to take you here. And this is where they've got a link to the chart corrections, which is the Coast Guard site where that comes into play. And it also, if we go back, so that's the updating the nautical charts, which is down here on the bottom of the charts.gc.ca under their nautical charts heading. And this is also where under the purchase charts for navigation, that's where you gain access to the dynamic interactive section that's on there. I see that people have been answering the questions about where to get charts, size of the charts. So that's good. Charts vary, different sizes. We will have a short little tutorial video on how I go about folding the charts so that all of the areas are accessible and visible. And just give me 2 seconds. So as an example, this is my filing system for all my charts. This fits in a normal file box. So this is my chart for 3456 and it's all folded up. And the way it's folded, you can see the chart number in the corner. And every chart, if you fold it the way I'll show you in the video, will fit into a file folder. So it makes it real easy to have in some sort of file system for at home for keeping track of things. And then I've got a portable one like this that I just take, that I put all of my charts in when I'm going on board the boat for the day, or for the week, or for the 2 weeks, or whatever. We've got all of the key details that are there. Let's go back and see if there's any other quick questions that we can address. We got the costs. If the current PowerPoint slides are a little different, there were a couple of pages that I didn't update, and I will update those to the most current ones that are there. And those seem to be the key, other than some of the issues that there were with the links that I provided, not getting the link to the file to download, but I will address that, so that will be taken care of. So if you do have any questions as we're going along, just type them in and we'll get to them as we go into the next section. So now that we know about what documents we need to have, and where we need to get them, and what charts we need to have on board, and how to make sure that those charts are current and updated, this is going to be key. And so now we're all good. We got all the documents. We've got all of our charts up to date as of this week. We've got all our notice to mariners sorted out. Now we can start thinking about where are we going and what are we doing. And some of the things that we've already done, we have the, and so we've had a question that says, wouldn't for pleasure craft less than 100 gross tons using electronic charts meet the requirements? No, because the electronic charts that meet the requirements are not ones that are functional for a recreational vessel. And so, yes, I've heard all kinds of discussions that say, well, you know, if you're not a commercial boat, you don't need them. If you've got a backup system, you don't need them. The legal requirement is you need to have the most current charts, and the ENC charts that they talk about, those do not run on your systems. And if you take a look at your Navionics, or you take a look at all, they all have a disclaimer that those do not replace or meet the legal requirements for the charts that you need to have on board. You know, the key is working with your paper and your electronic charts together. Right, the Canadian government and they're all working to try to move us more to electronic. In the States, they've already gone there. In the States, you cannot buy paper charts anymore. They're only available electronically, and they're available for free electronically for everyone. That's all that they have. The Canadian government is working their way there, but they are not there yet. The first step that they're doing is they're now looking at printing the charts from the electronic ones that they've got, so they could be more current, less expensive. They would be a different size. To the best of my knowledge, the only one that they've done with that is one out in Newfoundland at the moment as a test. So no, you do need to have paper charts on board your boat. Okay. And yeah, it's not $50 each. The charts are about $20 or $23. I think the last time I purchased them last week or a week ago. If you buy them, you know, through the government site online, I don't know why they put the $50 price tag, but if you go to your chandlers or go to any chandler that has a print on demand capabilities, they're going to be about $23. The key is don't buy charts for all of BC unless you're planning on going all over BC in the immediate future. Make sure that you've got your chips there so that you're ready to go, and your charts for the area where you're ready to go on the trip that you're doing. There's a lot of charts that you don't need to have if you're never going up north, or if you're going up north and you're going, well, I might go up there in 4 years. Buy those charts in 4 years so that they're current and you don't have to be making updates on all those charts that you're not using all the time. And, you know, there was a question about, can you update Garmin to the latest chart data? Yes, all of your electronic charts can be updated to their chart data, which is not compliant. And you need to make sure that, you know, if you're paying for the updates, you know, they're usually an annual update. That is an annual license that you have for your electronic charts, to be able to make sure that you've got the most current. But remember, those charts are not necessarily going to have all the information that have been updated from the CHS charts. And that's why legally you need to have the CHS charts available on board your boat. So let's talk about our preliminary planning steps. We can come back to charts. We can send me emails and talk about that. And we will be going through a more detailed tutorial on updating. But there's really 3 key steps that you can go through in your preliminary planning. You've got your step 1, which is doing a rough plan for each day and for your whole trip if you're doing a multi-day trip. That's what we're going to focus on discussing and talking about this evening. Step 2 is doing a detailed plan for each day, and that's going to occur much closer to the particular day, where you're going to be taking into consideration weather, wind conditions, current conditions, more detailed items, and we'll talk about that next week when we start to go through. And step 3 is the pre-departure check. And so this is where, as you're going through and taking a look at what you need to do with regards to your weather, your radio check, your safety checks, and everything prior to departing on a particular day. And we'll talk more about that. We'll take a look at step 2 and step 3 next week in the session. This week, we want to talk mostly about the rough plan. How do we what do we need to start thinking about when we're putting our trip together? And this may be done months in advance, or it may be done a couple of days in advance. It depends upon when the trip is or what you're doing. There's a number of things that you're going to want to consider when you're putting the plan together. One of these might be, how much time do you want to spend on the water each day? This may differ. If I'm wanting to go somewhere, I'm good for get on the boat and, I'm good to be underwater or underway for 10, 12 hours. That's not a problem. If I'm out on a trip with my family, they're more shorter distances. Let's stop and have some fun. So we may be doing 3 or 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day, depending upon where we've got. What's the longest day you are wanting to take care of? That's going to impact what you're going to be planning as far as where are you going to stop? What are you going to do? Are you going to be sailing in daylight hours only? Are you going to be comfortable with sailing at twilight, or are you going to be comfortable with sailing at night? Depending upon your qualifications, your experience, your comfort, and, are you chartering the boat? Because charter boats are not allowed to operate in hours other than daylight. That's going to dictate the range of time. How early are you going to be able to leave? How late are you going to be able to be on the water before you have to be at the dock? How many days are you planning to be away? What sort of fuel requirements do you need to have? What provisioning requirements do you have to think about? What pump out requirements are you going to be dealing with? How much water do you need to have on board for drinking and cooking and available? So all of these things are the stuff that's going to come out of this rough plan as you start thinking about putting things together. And that's where, just over the years, I've evolved this spreadsheet as there's been information, and this is a copy of what is available on the website that we provided you with that takes a look at a couple of key things that has some key pieces. There's a little bit more information that we're going to have that I may update, because I even had some stuff that I realized wasn't on the draft that I had put together. But one of the key things that you've got is you need to think about where you're going, what your distance, your speed, your sunrise, sunset, slack, high, and low tide in the areas. What charts do you need? And that's where you see that section where we were putting down what's the coastal approach and harbor charts do you need, as well as plans for what you're going to need to be doing on the day. So the first thing is to think about the start and end point on each day. And this is where I personally use Navionics, Garmin Boating, for when I'm doing these quick plans as my advanced plans that are there. I use other tools like Orca and Aquamap when I'm looking at more detailed plans. Depends on what the situation is. or the papal charts to just sort of say, well, how far do I want to be traveling on that particular day? And this is where, if you are a powerboat or a sailboat, it's a good idea to sort of say, what is our average boat speed? Now, that's not your maximum hull speed that you've got. It's what are you typically making as far as speed to your destination? Now, I can make 6.5 knots on my boat, but when I'm doing my planning, I plan it for 5 knots when I'm looking at my timing. To sort of get an idea of how long is that going to take me to get from A to B. So with Navionics or the other planning apps, which we'll take a look at next week, when you set your vessel up in those, you put down the details such as what's your boat speed, what is your max height, what is your beam. You put all the details about your vessel in so it can take those into consideration as it's planning your pathway, particularly when it's looking at draft and mast height, when it's trying to figure out what bridges is it going to navigate you under or what passes is it going to take you through. And one of the things that's really, really key is knowing what your estimated fuel consumption is. And as a sailboat, I do my calculations on the basis of if I have to motor the whole way on a particular trip, how much fuel am I going to burn? And so this becomes important to think about. If there is no wind, what do I need to have as far as fuel on board? Where do I need to stop for fuel along the way if I'm doing a multi-point trip? And I've got to sort of think about that. And one of the things when we take a look at the daily planning, as we move to probably week number 4 or week number 3, I have adapted planning sheets where while we're underway, I've got the plan all out of my Navionics, but I'm also transferring the data. I've got my daily plan on paper with me, but I also, every half hour or every major change in direction, I fill in my on the water plan that shows me where I am, what's my time, what's my speed, what am I doing, so I can get a guide that lets me know, am I ahead of schedule, am I behind schedule, because that may have a huge impact if you've got a particular window of hitting a pass. A couple of years ago, I was getting my standing rigging done down at Blackline Marine down in Victoria, and it took a little while for me to get the boat. And I was coming back to Nanaimo, and I had everything figured out. I knew when I was going to hit Dodd, and I had bailouts along the way. And I knew that based on my delay out of there, plus the wind shifted and I was fighting a bit of a headwind, I knew there was no way I was going to hit Dodd by the end of the slack that I would be able to get through on. But I knew that before I hit the bailout to get out through Portlier. And I had also planned for getting out through Portlier to say, okay, if I'm going to be late on Dodd, what's my timing when I can get out through Portlier Pass and then go back to Nanaimo through the outside, which added some travel time, had me getting into Nanaimo at night, which I was fine with. But all of that was possible because I had done the plan for the primary. I had done the plan for the backup. I knew my timing from each of those key steps, and I knew that from Portlier to Dodd, what it was going to take me, and I knew that wasn't going to happen. So rather than find some place this side of Dodd to hang out until the next morning when the next slack showed up, I was able to simply bail out, and I simply arrived in Nanaimo a couple hours later, but that was all because of the planning. Now, I note on here that you need to note any choke points, such as tidal passages. So Dodd Narrows, Samson Narrows, Seymour Narrows, any places where you've got water flow, that is going to be a point that it can be a problem. So this is where, if you take a look on the chart that you see the little sample of, even though on the first day, this is July 23rd, the plan is to go from Nanaimo to Salt Spring Island, but Dodd Narrows is going to be a critical timing element because that's where we're going to need to hit that at slack. So I do that choke point or that stage, even in my broad plan, I want to go to Nanaimo to Dodd, and then I'm going to go from Dodd to Salt Spring. And so I then get my distance from my electronic planning app as I go through. The time it's going to give me that because I've told it that my vessel is going to be doing 5 knots. And then we start to sort of lay out. And then the next day, we're going to go from Salt Spring to Brentwood Bay. It's got the distance and the time. And the next day, I'm going to stay at Brentwood Bay. And so we put that in there as well. Even if it's not a travel day, I always put those days on the planning sheet because particularly if I'm going to be at anchor, I need to know what's going on with the tides the entire time that I'm going to be there at that anchor. I need to know, where am I going to go? Do I need to be worrying about taking things in or what's going to be going on? As an example, there was one summer I was coming back from Princess Louisa, and we were anchoring in the Harmony Islands, and it was a very busy weekend, and there was really only a couple of spots where I could get to, and I've had to sort of anchor a bit on the slope, but that put me a little bit closer on my stern tie, and the tide was going to be going way, way out that night. It was an extreme low tide. So I knew on where I was set up that I was having to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to take in some slack off the anchor line, because otherwise, as the tide went out, my butt end was going to be, being close and friendly with the shoreline. And so if you've got all this stuff planned in advance and you've got it on your planning sheet, it avoids making critical mistakes in a stressful situation. You don't want to, in a challenging situation, in a tough environment, having to break out everything and remember how to do all these plans while you're underway in a stressful situation where you've just lost all your electronics or whatever the case may be. You want to have this stuff planned in advance in a calm manner and think about what your backups are going to be. What are your alternatives if you miss slack tide at a particular location? If you're fighting things as you're going. If you're doing a single day plan, this is sort of the same information in the top part that we would have on that multi-day plan. But this is where in the bottom of that, this is where I'm going to lay out the more detailed plan for the day of saying, what time am I starting? Where am I making a turn? What's my heading going to be? When am I going to make my next turn? What's the time? So mapping out every path that you're doing, exactly what you would do. And this is where many of you have probably used Garmin Boating, Navionics, Aquamap, Orca to do these types of plans. And that's what I would use in the initial stage when I'm doing my pre-planning, is I would just take it to the first point, to the first waypoint, mark that time and distance in, and then take it to the next waypoint, mark that time and distance in, so that I have every waypoint all laid out on my planning sheet so I know what I'm looking for. And the reason for that is because when I've got that laid out and I hit a particular checkpoint or a waypoint, if you will, along the way, and I know I'm ahead of schedule for getting to Dodd for slack, if I'm under motor, I can back off on the motor a little bit. If I'm running a little bit behind schedule at that checkpoint, I can just, up the revs a little bit to try to pick things up. It's a lot easier to make those adjustments and get yourself back on track early, as opposed to constantly being a little bit behind and realizing it when it's too late or requires a much more significant correction in order to make those adjustments. And we'll take a look at using these planning sheets a little bit more next week as we start to integrate our electronic and our paper-based planning as we go. One of the things that is important, as we mentioned, if you're going to be chartering a vessel, is to know when sunrise and sunset is. But it's also important, if you have your own vessel, to know when nautical twilight is. Nautical twilight is the part where you can still identify definition. You can recognize the horizon. It's a little gray. The sun hasn't come up yet, but you can see where things are. So for example, if we take a look at this for today in Nanaimo, that sunrise was at 7:41 a.m. and sunset was at 7:11 p.m. But nautical twilight, when we take a look at that, nautical twilight started at 6:32 a.m. So an hour before sunrise, and it ended at 8:20 p.m., which is an hour and 9 minutes after sunset. So depending upon what your comfort is with having a decreased lighting, but still having the ability to recognize definitions, it can let you know if you've got a little bit of a larger window before you're going into night. There's a lot of different sites that you can use for this, and a lot of your apps will give it as well. They may just give you sunrise and sunset, but not nautical twilight. But I like to use the website timeanddate.com. And the reason being is because you put in a particular city, and it's surprising how many places it actually has, whether it's just a particular harbor, around the BC coast. You can put in Ganges, you can put in anywhere. And I've not found very many locations that it doesn't have the details, that it doesn't give you the information. So it is really, really good, and it can allow you to plan in advance for where sunrise and sunset and nautical twilight is. And so this is part of the planning step that we go. We did talk about the fact about needing to identify the charts that you need for the trip, and we showed you how to go in and look for your coastal, the approach, and harbor charts, so you can put those onto your particular chart. And then we've got to think about what is the role that currents and tides are going to have, and what impact might they be. And so this is where we can refer to the Canadian tide and current tables. Ports and passes is one that I use a lot. And it's now 2 volumes as opposed to 1. So the printing's a little bit easier to read, but it depends on where you're going and what you're doing. There's also the Canadian Atlas of Tidal Currents, Volume 3, and you can get the current atlas tables from Wagoneer that will allow you to do the adjustments on that. So yeah, how often do I use these? I have them sitting right on my desk, on the side as we're going through here. So these are the documents that you're going to use to think about what are the tides and currents and the impact that they're going to have. And you can also use the current tables, as we talked about, using the current table atlas. Predict Current, for those who are sailors, may be aware of Predict Wind, which is a really good app. About a year ago, they came out with Predict Current, which gives you the same detail that Predict Wind has, but based on the current forecasts that there are in a particular area. And this can be extremely powerful. We'll be taking a look at this more in week number 3, because it will show you a particular current pattern and identify where eddies may be and where you might want to be going on the port side or the starboard side of a pass to sort of go, or maybe swinging past, depending upon where the water flow is going to be impacting based on the wind, based on the tides, and based on everything that's going on. So it can help you really fine tune both your passage of where you're going, but also thinking about how is this going to impact your timing. As I mentioned, my boat can do 6 knots. I plan for 5, but typically running 5.5 to 6. Well, if I'm fighting a 1.5 knot current and I'm going 6, my speed over ground is going to be 4.5. On the other hand, if I've got a 1.5 knot current with me, my speed over ground is now going to be 7.5.
And so my time to site, my time to destination, the amount of time I need to be under power or whatever the case may be, is going to be significantly challenged depending upon where the current is. Am I going with it? Am I going against it? How long am I going with it and against it? What is it going to be? And that's where the Predict Current app can really come into play, because it can help me sort of take a look and say, okay, if I leave now, I'm going to be fighting this. But if I go and I move the slider to a different time and I choose a different destination where I'm going to be, I can sort of see where am I likely going to shift in the water pattern. And this can give you a much better idea of what you're doing as far as your timing, knowing what the impacts of the currents are going to be, because that's one of the things we deal with around here. That's why we've got, a ports and passes with so many updates on the tides and the currents to keep track of things, because we need to be utilizing these as much as we possibly can, because it can, almost double the amount of time that it takes me to get somewhere. If there was a 2-knot current that we were dealing with, if I'm doing 6 and I'm fighting it, I'm doing 4. If I'm doing 6 and I'm going with it, I'm doing 8. That's twice the speed over ground, which means I'm going to be covering that a lot more frequently and a lot faster. So that's a really big piece that comes into play in thinking about what you're doing. It's also going to be important to think about what's the water flow going to be like on any of those passes, whether it's Dodd Narrows, whether it's Samson Narrows, whether it's Seymour Narrows, as an example. You might take a look at Seymour Narrows and go, okay, well, I've got the window of slack, but thinking about how quickly that's going to change. I was looking at one day coming up in Seymour Narrows, and it's going from like a flood of 14.7 to an ebb of 15.2. Now that's a massive, massive change. So the speed and the time of that change means that it's going to get fast really quick. And this is something that you can also plan for if you don't have an app like Predict Current that's going to tell you that, or Navionics and Garmin Boating, and it makes it a little bit more challenging. We're going to show you a little trick next week. Many of you probably used it already, but one of the things when you're going to be going through a pass, you don't have to wait until the exact minute of slack tide. Although it's amazing how many boats I see sitting outside Dodd Narrows like 5 minutes before slack tide, and they're like waiting as if all of a sudden this water is going to turn off and then it's going to change. You've got a window where the speed of the water is going to build up and then it's going to slide down. And so you've got to think about what your window is. And you've also got to think about what is your vessel's and your, as a skipper, tolerance for what is your vessel able to handle. Now, whether you're going against the current or with the current, it has the same complications, just in a different way. If you got the current with you, you go, yeah, I'm not going to be fighting it, but you don't have the maneuverability or control. Think about if you've ever gone downhill skiing and you've lost control. It's like you're going wherever you end up, not necessarily where you want to be. And that's not where you want to be with your boat on the water as you're going through. So I'm very comfortable with my boat going through either fighting for or against a 2.5. I use 2 generally as a guide. Anything plus or minus 2 knots, I got no problems going through with my boat, because I know that I'm going to have full control, full capabilities, full maneuverability. So for me, whenever I'm looking at a passage such as Dodd Narrows, I need to know what's the time window where it's going to be 2 knots on one side of slack and 2 knots on the other side. And you can do that when you're using Navionics or Garmin Boating, so that when I'm doing my plan, I know that although slack may be at 12:24, my window is going to be 11:15 to 13:12. And that's going to change on every single tide change, because it's dependent upon what the speed is at max flood and max ebb. And so that's where making these calculations and taking a look at secondary tide calculations or secondary current calculations are going to be key. And we'll talk more about that next week. So one of the other things that's really important that you want to get from your guides is noting the flood and ebb and noting the direction of when flood and ebb is. This is going to be really important because down in Nanaimo, we're really used to the fact that, hey, if it's flooding, it's heading north. If it's ebbing, it's heading south. You get up to, Seymour Narrows, it's not that way. You get up into those areas up that direction, things are going to change. You're going through Gabriola Passage, that passage goes east-west. So it's not a north-south situation. So you need to make note of what is the direction of flood or direction of ebb. And that's going to be visible on all of your planning tools. It's also going to be visible on your ports and passes as you're working your way through. You want to take a look, if you don't have the electronic tools, you can look at the tidal current indicators on the paper charts. Think about when slack tide is, and think about the safe passage timing for any tidal passage that you've got. And yeah, the question was, is it called predict current? Yeah, it is. I'll pull it up before we get to the end of the session, just double check on it. I know it's, and yes, Navionics does account for daylight savings time. So all of the apps are going to have to update when BC doesn't change again. And that's the other reason, when you're taking a look, if you're using the Canadian government charts, they do not take into account time change, whereas ports and passes does take into account time change. So you're going to see different things with it as you go with it. Predict Wind does have currents in the app, but it's not as developed as the full Predict Wind or Predict Current app. At least I haven't taken a look at it this year, but yeah, it is still there. Predict Current, one word. Try searching for that and see if that comes up. I know it's definitely for iOS because that's what I use it on. I don't know if it's on Android. And so one of the key things, if we take a look, I always map out what any high tides or low tides are going to be, where I'm going to be going, because that's going to be important if I'm going to be anchoring. I need to know how much scope I need to have out. I need to know how much tide change is going to occur from when I'm anchoring to the middle of the night. Where is the boat going as they work their way along? And there's a lot of key pieces that sort of come from there. When we take a look at an area such as Brentwood Bay, what I do when I'm doing my rough plan, now obviously when I'm working out my secondary tide calculations, this is a planning sheet that I'm going to have with me and have done, where I've taken a look at what the reference station is and all of the specific changes. But if I'm putting it into the spreadsheet, I can immediately take a look and say, okay, if I'm taking a look at Ganges Harbor, I need to use Fulford Harbor is the reference station, and at low tide, it's going to be plus 3 minutes, and there's no change in depth. High tide is going to be minus 1 minute, and there's no change in depth. Whereas at Brentwood Bay, it's also using Fulford, and so I'm using the reference information from that. And we'll take a look more about that next week when we're doing our actual plans and put all of that in the side as we go. And so this all lays out. And when I'm taking a look at Samson Narrows as an example, Samson Narrows is one of those interesting ones in that most of the day, it's going to be under 2 knots. But there is the occasional day where I've seen Samson Narrows be running about 3.5. And if you've ever gone through there at 2 or 2.5 and you've hit one of the eddies or the little whirlpools, you've hit it. The boat starts doing a little shaky shimmy dance as it goes through. So again, it's all about understanding your vessel and what speed you're comfortable with going for or against as you work your way through. We've had a question about, rule of 12s or using the app. I do both. I use the app, plus I also use the planning sheet to be able to calculate what the difference is going to be for dealing with the window. I typically will use either Predict Current or Navionics for finding my window, as for my personal window, but there are steps and stages that I do take manually as well as a double check. I never trust the electronics 100%. Now, obviously, if you're doing a multi-day trip, you're going to want to do some stops along the way. Now, wherever you're stopping, that's where you want to take a look at the sailing directions for every harbor where you're going to be going into, because that's going to cover any known issues that you've got. It's all going to cover as far as anchoring or entering the harbor, where you should be located, what are the obstructions. Remember, these are the CHS documents that are going to tell you what are the things you need to be concerned about that they can't fit on the charts. That's one of the reasons why the current edition of Sailing Directions is a required document to be on your boat. It's very challenging these days to not have an iPad or a tablet of some format on board your vessel, to have all of these documents and all of these apps, so that you've got that information that's there. But taking a look at Sailing Directions is always one of the things that we do when I'm going to be sort of going the next day. I take a look at what my destinations are, whether it's a lunchtime anchorage or whether it's an end of day anchorage. I look at the sailing directions and see, what do they tell me about that particular location? What are the things I need to be concerned about? What are the local information that has come up? And I also check the local information or guidebooks. So Wagoneer, the Gulf Islands guides from Dream Speaker series, or the ones that I really like using are the Salish Sea Pilot guides. I find them extremely valuable and detailed. There's insights that you're going to get from all of these, depending upon what you're looking at doing and where you're looking at going. But they will generally all have some key insights as far as best places for anchorage, where to park yourself, where to be able to take a look at things, where you're going to have the best sunrise or the sunset, which is the prime spot, time of day to get there, etc. All sorts of things that you want to take a look at when you're thinking about what is the destination that you're going to go to and what can I be expecting. One of the amazing apps that we've got available to us here on the West Coast is the BC Marine Trails app, website rather. And it is a public website. You can become a member and gain access to more additional information, but it is extremely relevant to boaters because unless you're planning on staying on board your boat all the time, what bcmarinetrails.org does is, if you go to that website, you can go to their map, and it's like what shows up there. I can show you in a bit more detail, but it gives you information about where are the sites you can go to shore, any directives from First Nations with regards to access to some of the lands, any stewardship fees that may apply, and any hiking that you've got in the area where you can launch or take a kayak to shore if you're doing that. And even if you do an individual membership, it's only $35 for the year, and that helps them continue their initiative. So let's just take a quick look at the BC Marine Trails app, because it's one that's extremely valuable that not necessarily everybody may have had the opportunity to utilize. So if we take a look at the BC Marine Trails app, you can either become a member, or there's a link that takes you to the map. And so if you're not a member, then you can click on the member map, or if you are a member, you can click on the member map. I can show you the difference in that because I am a member as well. But if we just look at the public map that you've got, I don't need to see this. It's a great little map that you can simply zoom in to a particular area, and it gives you an index. So if we're taking a look here, we say, oh, here's Qualicum Beach. What does that say? Well, here's the details on Qualicum Beach. Lets you know which First Nations territory it is. It's a launch site. There's no tent sites there. Talks to you about landing. No camping is permitted. No fires. There's toilets, paid beachfront walking. So it gives you all of the different details. So if we take a look here at West Bolinas Island South, we see that this is a picnic area here. So it's a day use area. Tells us the First Nations that's there, gives us some information, easy on well-protected pebble, gravel, or beach and cove, 50 meters wide between bedrock walls, southern aspect, moderate gradient. And so at this time, only BC Mid-Trails coastal caretakers are allowed on there who are looking after the island, may camp on the site. So if you are looking if you're going to be on a kayak or doing tours and stuff like that, there's a lot of amazing resources here that can let you know what's there. It also gives you a lot of details, such as overgrown trail that you can go to, what can you see, tide pools, what nature is there, decompression lights, what type of plant life do you have. So it's a really great resource to think about as you're looking your way along. And they've got different layers that you can have. So you can see you've got campsites, informal sites, dispersed sites, launch sites, emergency pullout, private or commercial, day use, ferry terminals, or areas that are closed. Or you can see the particular trails that are available. So if you're looking for the different BC marine trails, you can see all the trails mapped out. And so as you guide those on, and you can see all the reserves that are there. So these are great little tools to sort of help you find a lovely little trail that you can be taking, and it shows you what you've got. You've got kayak routes that are mapped out. And so it's a great resource to really give you some valuable information about what can you do on the shore. And a lot of the details that we've seen here are not available in the other guides, or if they are, they're not available in this level of detail. So I would encourage you to have a bit of an exploration on the BC Marine Trails site and have a look at their map and consider helping to support their initiatives, because they're a really great organization doing some valuable things in our area to help us provide us with some great details. Now, if you're going to do a multi-day trip, you've got to make a plan for what are you going to do overnighting. Are you going to anchor, or are you going to be going into a marina? What's your backup if that is busy? So there's lots of times where I've been going up and getting up to Desolation Sound, or going in areas, I'm looking at the AIS, I'm going, oh man, there's not very many boats there. And as I come around the corner, it's like, yeah, they all got their AIS turned off. There's way too much traffic that's sort of cruising on in that spot. And so this way here, it gives you the ability to sort of say, okay, well, if that's busy, where am I going to go? What is my backup going to be? If you've got reservations, then it's pretty easy. You can say, okay, I'm at the dock at Salt Spring Marina, and that's been confirmed. So that means you've got a reservation. Or, sometimes if I'm looking at using a reciprocal at, say, Maple Bay Yacht Club, and I get there and the wall is full and they don't have space anymore, then I need to know what is the options for going through Samson Narrows, because my bailout is going to be probably Genoa Bay. I'm going to go around and anchor in Genoa Bay around the corner, but that's going to involve going through Samson Narrows. I'm going to need to know what my timing window is and all of that. I also sort of try to take a look at each location where I'm going to be spending an overnight and look at some of the resources that I'm going to have. Do they have fuel available? Do they have fresh water available, potable water that I can fill up my water tanks with? Do they have garbage drop off? Is there a pump out available? And if so, where is it? Are there groceries available? Is there dining available if we want to go to a restaurant or something that's there? And do they have laundry, as an example? And so this is where, if you're planning a multi-day trip, things about where do you need to make sure you're topping up your fuel? And that's where knowing how much fuel you're going to use maximum on any given segment of your trip. And then on the actual daily planning sheet, which we'll walk you through next week, I'm keeping track of exactly what time the motor's running, exactly what time the motor's turned off. So if I've gotten a really good day of sail and the motor's only run for 1.25 hours, I know that at my normal RPMs, I'm going to be using 2.35 liters per hour. So I know exactly how many liters I've planned to use. And that's going to be important for knowing when you need to fill up, but also knowing how much to be watching for when it's going to be slowing, when you want to be slowing down on that fill. Because depending upon how easy it is or how accurate your fuel gauge is, my original one was not so much, my new one is a lot better. You're able to sort of plan and say, okay, we need to fill up and I'm going to take about 43 liters. So as you're getting closer to 40, you can start slowing up a little bit on the fuel and see how close you get to that. And that will give you an idea of verifying your fuel consumption plan as far as what you thought. And by doing that as well, it's also going to be great for helping to keep track of your hours on the motor in case that's not working no longer on your vessel. And all of that's going to come into play for planning your maintenance. At this step, I may start thinking about where are we going to eat. If it's just me, it may well be something just on board. If I've got family, I may need to think about, well, what's the restaurant we're going to go to? What's everybody's particular food preferences? So you see in this case, for the trip down to Salt Spring and Brentwood Bay, we're going to do lunch en route down to Salt Spring and then do dinner at the Treehouse Cafe. And then the next morning, either go back to the Treehouse Cafe for breakfast or have breakfast on board. Lunch will be en route and dinner's going to be at the Brentwood Bay Resort, because all of this is going to impact thinking about your provisioning plan. So what are the groceries you're going to need to have? How many days are you going to bring this through? Are you going to put this all together? And so, yes, all of these planning sheets are going to be available on the course website. So all these planning sheets, all the forms that I use, PDFs of them or spreadsheet versions are all going to be available for you to download from this, as well as examples that we're taking a look at as we work our way through. So when I do all of this, this is going to give a very good plan, sort of a good layout about what's going to be happening. But one of the other ones that's really important here in Canada is we don't have quite the same access to pump outs as there are down in the United States in the Northwest. So you may need to plan things a little bit more as far as, you know, how frequently you're going to need to pump out. When are you going to be far enough away from shore to be able to use your macerator if you need to on an ebb? Ideally, you're never doing that. Ideally, you're always using pump outs. And so planning for where are you going to do your pump out, and that may impact well, how many days is it going to be before I've got access to another pump out? So you may not have much to pump out, but you want to get it empty because you want to make sure that you've got the tank as empty as possible before you start that long trip, before you're going to have another pump out as you go. And so georgiastrait.org has a great little vessel sewage pump out map that helps you find where the nearest pump out station is near you. And I did see something just the other day that for any of you that do go around down the Brentwood Bay area, I believe it was last fall, they voted to put a pump out station into Brentwood Bay that would be publicly available and accessible, because there hasn't really been something down there for quite some time since Bouchard Gardens shut theirs down. So so knowing where you've got that and when those sorts of things come up, that's one of the things that the georgiastrait.org site will have the information on. So it's really great for being able to do that. All right. So that's a couple of the key things that we've got. I can show you just a couple of brief things as we're working our way along as we go, but also available for any questions that you may have. So just as an example, let me go in here. And let me change this over. Yeah, Paul, heard that that anglers is a touch and go. Like sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I hadn't seen the full details on it, but yeah, knowing where you've got the pump outs are is going to be key. So this is an example of a trip that I've got planned, that just to give you an idea on how all of these things sort of come together onto a planning sheet. Let me make this a little bit larger. Crank this up to 300%. So here's an example, and you can see that there were some screenshots from this as we were taking a look. So this is a planning sheet that I've got for family trip, July 23rd. Going to leave Nanaimo from Townsite Marina, where I've got my boat. We're going to hit Dodd Narrows. And that's where we've got 5.8 nautical miles. Going to take me an hour and 8 minutes at 5 knots. And I've got nautical twilight and sunrise, Nanaimo's high and low tide. And I see Dodd is slack at 1327, going from a 6.2 knot flood to a 3.1 knot ebb. So I know which way the time change is going through. And I see the charts that I need for Nanaimo to Dodd. All right, my coastal, my harbor, and my approach. And then from Dodd to Salt Spring, it's going to be 27.5 nautical miles, going to be about 5 hours and 26 minutes. Sunset's going to be at 9:04. Twilight is 10:34. And because that's Ganges Harbor, I see Fulford low and high. And so therefore high tide is going to be this, and low tide, and then high tide. So even though I'm going to be at the dock, it doesn't really matter, but I always still do all of these plans so I know what I'm expecting. So if I have to be at anchor, I've got that, and I'm going to be staying at Salt Spring Marina. It's confirmed. There is fuel, there is water, there's garbage, there's a pump out at the Ganges Coast Guard dock, there's groceries and dining, and meal plan is in place. And this is where each of these steps, I've tracked what is my fuel consumption going to be if I'm running at, full power along the way. So each stage, I've got this all laid out on my plan. So it's telling me that in that total trip, my total fuel consumption, if I don't put the sails up at all, which would be a really sad trip, I'm going to use 48.1 liters of fuel of my 75-liter fuel tank. So I won't need to be stopping and getting fuel on way. I'll be able to just fuel up back in Nanaimo when I get back, and I've still got more than sufficient, and that's going to be changed as we go along the way. So this is the type of layout and plan when I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing, where we're going to be going, and what's the stops going to be along the way. And by doing this in advance, it just helps you when you transfer it onto your main daily planning sheet. So let's go here. So this is if I haven't put this onto the website yet, which I may not have, I'm going to be putting that together as we go, and this one will be up there. So this is where it's a secondary tide calculation sheet, and so this has got the reference station, the corrections, and the secondary station that's there. And then over on the back side, we've got the secondary current calculation worksheet that's got all of the details with regards to the reference station, the secondary station, the time to turn, speed at max, time difference, speed ratio at the percentage, so that we know what's going to be happening at each of those stops. And that's all part of the planning, which we'll take a look at next week as we go.
Yeah, Steve, I can definitely send you a filled out template so that you can take a look at that as an example. That's not a problem. I've got tons of those as we go. Now, the other question was the departure times and ETAs to the waypoints. That's not part of the long-term planning. That's going to be looking at more of a particularly day side of things. And so that's where when we took, let me just pull up here. Give me 30 seconds. Cognizant that we got about 5 minutes left here. So if we take a look at the daily plan, so this is where, as I was working through the daily plan, this is in the bottom section of the daily plan as I moved the stuff that's saying this is my entire trip in one spreadsheet. On the daily plan, I'm then going to have what's the weather forecast, what's the wind and waves predicted, what's the max flood time and direction, max ebb time and direction. And it's in the bottom part of this chart that I'm going to be putting in the start time, elapsed time, the latitude and longitude. And so this is where each line is going to be one of the waypoints that we've got. And I'm also going to fill in all of my true north, my variation, my magnetic north, and I'm going to transfer the deviation from my compass card and have my compass. And so all of this is going to be filled out in advance for the particular trip that I'm doing on that day. So I'll have one of these sheets for every day, and this is going to go into the cockpit with me, so I know what was my plan for the day. And I can even, most chart plotters are going to allow you to import your plan from Navionics or Aquamaps or Orca directly onto the chart plotter so you can follow your path. But even if not, what you've got is on the planning sheet. If I've laid this plan out with my latitude and longitude and I've done my plan, I can manually input each of these particular waypoints in onto my chart plotter just by entering my latitude and longitude. And because I've got my elapsed time, it's almost like running a car rally. I know, am I ahead of schedule or am I behind schedule at each step, at each turn I'm making? I know, should I be here at this point or where do I have? And yes, Gary, every one of the PDF forms that I'm providing you is all fillable with unique fields. So they're all PDF fillable because the one that I use on board the boat for my regular plan as I'm going through, what I do is at the end of the day, when I get back home, I take that handwritten planning sheet that I did, or not my planning sheet, but my handwritten actual sheet. That's essentially a logbook sheet, and I transfer that into, it's on a fillable PDF, and I'll share that one with you as well, but just give me 1 second here. Oh, got to go to the right folder. Too many folders. So if I take a look as an example, if we go, so this is an actual planning sheet that was done, that kept track. That was an actual log sheet that took place. As we went through, we got the time, latitude and longitude. The position method was done by GPS. The speed at that point in time was 3.3 knots. Distance traveled was 0. And then we have magnetic. And so this is where normally all of these would be filled in. And then was it sail power or motor sail? And then any comments or details, and it goes through. So that was an early one, an early iteration that we had. And so now, as an example, if we take a look, and I do have these logs fillable format for you to use as well, but I've also got ones that are for my boat. And so these are set up. Oh, that's complete. Where do we go here? So I'll pull up the generic one. And so this is the generic log. And so this is all a fillable PDF as well. And so because I don't know what people have. So in my case, I've got 2 freshwater tanks, black water tank, propane tanks, and I've got measurement sensors on all of those. So at the beginning of the day, I mark all that in. I mark my engine hours start and end, my fuel start and end, both estimated and actual from my instrumentation. And then all of the planning goes in, and then hours under motor, how much fuel used per hour, and what did that work out to. And so by having all of these, and yes, they are all fillable, and I will be providing access to all of them for you. So you will have full access to all of that as we go. And so that's where we are. And if you do have any questions as you're working your way along or taking a look at anything, or if you find any links that are not working, please just reach out and let me know. Next week, we're going to be sort of going from this large pre-planning stage to looking at, now we're going to plan our particular day. And that's where we're going to be getting into Garmin boating and looking at Orca and putting all these things together. Looking at doing our plans and how all these bits and pieces work for us. So I will be available if you have any questions as you're going along. If you don't have Navionics or that next week, don't worry about it. We will have access to some other tools that we'll be taking a look at. I think I can get you a 14-day trial of Savvy Navi and different tools like that. And taking a look at, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at a variety of navigation planning tools that you might use, whether it's Garmin boating, Aqua Maps, Savvy Navi, Orca, and we're going to take a look at same planning on each of those apps as we go through, so that you've got an opportunity to sort of see what is the difference between these. Why might I want one or the other? And how does this all come together as we go? So we'll get everything together for you. And thanks very much for taking some of your time and joining us. And hopefully you get the opportunity to use some of these the resources and tools to help make your boating safer and have a great time on the water this summer. But we got 3 more weeks to go. So lots of information. This was just laying the groundwork and getting us started. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. And as always, the link that you used to get to this recording or get to this session is the same link that will take you to the recording of it. And so you'll be able to access the recording of that as well. It will be there. It's not going to be taken down. So if you want to go back and rewatch something that you weren't certain about, and the tutorials will be available on the website, so you'll have access to. All right, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. And big fan of trying to keep things on time. I said 7 to 9 and my clock says 9:02. So thanks, everybody. And for those of you that I haven't got sorted out yet with the Aqua Maps, I'll be doing that tomorrow. Anybody up until about this morning should find that they've got the charts and everything have been added to their account. And those that came in today will probably be done at some point tomorrow. So thanks very much, everybody. Have yourself a wonderful evening.